One of the more academically egregious things that occurs when there's a dust up in Israel of some sort is the statement a lot of people start making that Palestine isn't a real place and that Palestinians aren't a real people. This is an ignorant assertion on the point of most and willful misdirection from overly enthusiastic Zionists. Is it really a word that just suddenly began to be used in the 50s or 60s, as some assert? First, it should be obvious to everyone that foreigners use different names for a place than the natives do. Do people get hysterical because Germany is actually called Deutschland? Do we insist that Germany is not a place and that Germans are not a real people because they call themselves Deutschlanders? By virtue of the actual name of a country and who has lived there the longest, does this create justification for who can't live there and who may be forcibly removed? Just to mention, it didn't work out too well for Germany the last time they thought that way. Herodotus was a Greek historian and geographer, and he used the term Palestine, obviously a Greek variant of it, in his work during the 5th century BCE. From that point on, other writers adopted it in their own work, and Palestine gradually replaced Canaan as the name of the region. So at this point, it doesn't matter what people are calling it internally. Foreign scholars in the Greek world called it some variant of Palestine. So if the locals declare it the land of no bacon in Hebrew, the foreign scholars would say in Palestine, the land of no bacon was established on this day. So we have an issue to break down. The usage of the name Israel versus Palestine, and others that were used along the way too, but we won't get into them too much. So, first, Israel as a name was not used continuously throughout the history of the area. When the first kingdom of Israel fell to the Assyrians, Judea stood alone until it was conquered by the Babylonians. During the period of Herod the Great, he was the client king of the Romans of Judea. Now, the excitable types will tell you at this point that at the point that the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and drove out the Jews in 70 AD, they'll say that the Romans renamed the area to Palestine as some form of slight against the Jewish people. This is incredibly illogical. Assume for a moment that some great power went to war against Haiti and the Dominican Republic. Imagine these two countries are just utterly destroyed and cease to exist. Then the great power refers to the island the two nations sat on as Hispaniola. It's essentially the same effect. The area had been known as Palestine for 5 centuries. It happened to have different Jewish kingdoms on it during that time. If all those kingdoms are gone, why would you then continue to refer to it by the name of a state that is no longer there and hasn't been there for at least 2 centuries? Logically, in the absence of any kingdoms, the new rulers are going to name it either after some feature that is there, some familiar name, or rename it after something culturally relevant to the new owners. The Romans called the area Palestine. The Byzantines called the area Palestine. Sassanids called the area Palestine. When the Byzantines reconquered the area, they called it Palestine. When the first caliphate of Arabs conquered the area, they called it Palestine. When the Crusaders liberated the area, they called it the Holy Land in Palestine. And when the Seljuk Turks eventually took it over, they called it Palestine. And when the Ottomans finally took it, they called it, come on, guess, see where we go. Yes, they called it Palestine. But it doesn't stop there. When the British began a program of relocating European Jewish settlers to Ottoman controlled Palestine in the early to late 1800s, they referred to the area as Palestine. When they passed the Balfour Declaration, they drew up a document saying that the goal was to create a Jewish state in Palestine. After the war, when they worked with the League of Nations to create a mandate for the area, it was known as the Palestinian Mandate. When the British ended up turning over the problem after World War II to the UN, the solution they came up with was called the Plan for the Partition of Palestine. If in an alternate history the Palestinian Arabs and the Palestinian Jews had agreed to the UN partition plan, the country that would have resulted would have been called Palestine. The only reason the area is now called Israel is because that when the Palestinian Jews declared independence, they named it Israel. They named it after a kingdom that had been gone for many centuries that they strongly identified with. At the end of 1948 war, Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip and Jordan occupied the West Bank. Both countries avoided assimilating the Palestinian Arabs. In fact, to this day, there are refugee camps in Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon that house the third generation of Palestinian Arabs, and none of their hosts want to assume them as citizens. So the Palestinian Arabs are not Lebanese Arabs, and they're not Syrian Arabs, and they're not Jordanian Arabs, and they're not Egyptian Arabs. Who are they then? Israeli Arabs? I will tell you they're not Israeli Arabs because Israeli Arabs, for the most part, are Israeli citizens who are of Jewish and Arab descent. So let's pick this apart just a little bit more. Before 1920, there was historically no such country as Iraq. Yet today, clearly, there's a country called Iraq. It's made up of Arabs and Turkomans and Kurds and Assyrians. Yet there's no Iraqi ethnicity amongst these people. Yet Iraq exists, and its people are Iraqis. I can do the exact same exercise for Lebanon, Syria, Jordan. Lebanon and Syria were very similar to Palestine. They were merely regions on a map. They are majority Arab with a mix of Kurds, Turkomans, and Assyrians in them. Nobody has a hissy and says Lebanon doesn't exist. It's just some made up name. Nobody freaks out because the Lebanese don't exist as a people because it's somebody just made up. Now, I'm going to close this out, but because we no longer live in an age of nuance, I need to spell out things that some people may try to read into what I've been saying. Although I do find the foundational history of the Jewish homeland in Israel an unfortunate series of events. The state of Israel does exist. As such, it has the right to continue to exist. The Palestinian Arabs are going to eventually have to understand that the only way they're going to live on the land in freedom and prosperity is going to require them to alter their view of reality vis-a-vis Israel. So, comment below. Have you heard this argument before that the Palestinian people and the name Palestine are essentially just made up terms? If so, did I change your mind at all a little on it? If not, tell me why. Punch some holes in my arguments. Please smash the like button. If the YouTube algorithm has brought you here and you're not a regular subscriber, take a look at my titles. I do a whole bunch of different stuff. You might find something interesting. Please subscribe. And if you know somebody who might find this interesting, please share it with them. All right. Thank you for spending time with me this evening. Hope to see you again in a future video.